Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching. Tao. It's so cool. On a warm July morning, after breakfast, businessman Pablo decided to please his son Max with a new toy. It was hard to surprise the boy with anything. He already had board games, a huge amount of cars, various machines, guns, and much more. But since the boy was fond of all sorts of equipment, the man's choice fell on a flying drone. Pablo owned a profitable business. Accordingly, he had a lot of money in his wallet, and the man could afford to pamper his son with expensive toys and things. Presented to the drone was the latest model. It had LED lights and a camera that could shoot videos of excellent quality. The drone was not small in size and was clearly visible in the air. Together with his son, figuring out the instructions for the flying machine, the businessman installed batteries in it and the remote control. "Let's launch it now," proclaimed Max. Son, I have to go to the office now. Mummy also has an urgent matter, so Angela will help you to launch it, said Pablo. Good, answered the boy. We always have fun with her. His father nodded with a smile. For a moment, his mind flashed back to the memory of how the young babysitter had ended up in their family. It had been a pure accident that had saved his son's life. On an ordinary summer day, the businessman and his son were taking a stroll in the city park of the neighborhood where they lived. Max was lightly kicking, rolling a soccer ball. He managed to slow it down with his foot so that it would not roll onto the roadway that passes near the square. The boy concentrated on controlling the round object until he was distracted by the people walking ahead, who were looking at him. The businessman's son did not notice when his ball hit a rock and changed its trajectory, rolling straight onto the road. Max noticed his absence when the ball rolled off the sidewalk onto the roadway. "Palmy ball," shouted the boy. He had only managed to run to the curb when he felt someone grab his arm and heard a woman's voice say, "You're going to get hit. Stop, you're going to get hit." At the crosswalk, Max braked at the edge of the road and a car rushed past him at high speed. It didn't even slow down and drove off at the same breakneck speed. The boy somehow regained consciousness. And of course, he immediately forgot about the ball, turning away from the road. The businessman's son saw a beautiful young girl in front of him, looking at him anxiously. After a couple of seconds, Pablo, who was walking 3 meters behind his son, ran up to them. The fact was that the man had received a phone call from a colleague and had to deal with an urgent matter on the go. "Off, Max, are you okay? What happened?" He began to question his son, hugging him first. In response, the boy only looked then at the road, then at his savior. Then the businessman took his son by the hand and led him away from the road. "Now come with us," the businessman said to the stranger, and she followed father and son into the park, away from the roadway. There they sat down on a vacant bench in the shade of a tree. By this time, Max had finally come to his senses and was looking curiously at the girl who had prevented him from falling under the wheels of a car. "I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for saving my son. Now I owe you one. And since my spouse is often busy, I have a business proposition for you, namely, to join us as a nanny for Max," as pronounced Pablo, looking seriously at the girl who was sitting next to his son. After the shock of what had happened by the side of the road had passed, the businessman paid attention to the stranger's attractiveness. She looked about 25 years old, with long, thick, her blonde hair framed a pretty face with gray eyes and was gathered in a braid. But to the man, she was the one who had saved his only child from death. And besides, he loved his wife too much. "An interesting suggestion," replied the girl. "I love children, though I have not yet had any of my own. I don't know how, but I'm good at getting along with them, so I'll do it." "So we are going to be friends with her?" the boy asked. "Yes, son. This girl will be your nanny, and of course a friend. I hope replied the businessman to the child. But first, let her tell you about herself. What's her name and where from? With pleasure, the future nanny answered. My name is Angela. I was born and grew up in a small town. We can say that in the provinces. To tell you the truth, my family is not wealthy at all. My parents and I lived in poverty. For me, such an existence became morally unbearable. Seeing only hopeless poverty, I moved here to the metropolis. To get out of poverty myself and help my parents is what I wanted. That's commendable. The businessman appreciated her actions. Then, welcome to the family. I think it's about time we did too. My name is Pablo. This is my son Max. Thus, a simple girl from the provinces was suddenly given the chance to realize her goal. The wealthy family treated their employee loyally and with respect. They did not allow themselves rude words, never hurt the girl, but they did not carry her in their arms either. The girl could not complain about her pay either. Her salary was enough for her own needs and to send some of the money to her parents. Dad, when are we going to launch the drone? I'll call her now, the businessman said distractedly and dialed the girl's number on his cell phone. Pablo and his son decided to wait in the yard outside the house, waiting for the babysitter to arrive. Max just ran down the street, holding the drone with his arm outstretched forward. The girl arrived fairly quickly, and the first thing she did was say hello and then hugged Max. Let's get him up and running soon. I'm so excited to see him fly. Jumped around the nanny boy. Wait a little while. We have very little room in town to launch a drone of this model. It can get stuck in a tree or on the roof of a house, or it can fly off onto the road. Now our driver will take you out of town, where your flying machine can show off all its abilities. There's the expanse he needs and the gorgeous views of nature. And your mother made this for you so that you have something to eat during the walk. With these words, the businessman gave the nurse a picnic basket with fruit, sandwiches, and tea in a thermos. Thank you, said the nanny and turned to her ward. Well, shall we go? Let's see what your toy can do. He nodded happily. The nanny and the baby took a seat in the back of a luxury car. Placing a basket of provisions beside him, the boy waved to his father from the car window with a smile. The man responded in kind and with a calm heart went about his business in the office, knowing that his son was in good hands. On the way, Max did not let the gift out of his hands while talking about its merits and features. The father read all of this information to the boy from the box and in the instructions, and he remembered it perfectly. The child told so fascinatingly that the nanny listened to him with genuine interest. For the launch, my father advised me to go to the village, which was 30 kilometers away from the city. The landscape there was perfect for flying in the form of vast fields and beautiful forests. During the trip, the landscape through the car window changed from the urban jungle in the form of various buildings, billboards and sidewalks to the green suburban plains. After letting his babysitter know everything he knew about the drone, the boy spent the rest of the trip silently admiring out the car window. Angela followed his example, and then the village loomed ahead. They arrived at the place. The driver searched for a suitable spot to launch the drone for about 5 minutes. Finally, they arrived at a large field with a grove behind it. What do you think of this spot? The driver asked. It's a nice place. Nanny complimented him, taking the picnic basket. The girl got out of the car, took a deep breath of floral-scented country air. The child followed her out, clutching a drone in his hand. Wow, that's a lot of room. Now let's fly. The boy marveled. Angela patted him on the top of the head and walked a little forward. There she spotted a large stump from an old, long tree. It was perfect to use as a snack table after testing the flying machine. After setting up the drone, Max pressed the start button. The blue and red lights flashed. The 4 powerful propellers spun. and the machine soared into the sky. As this was the first time he was flying the drone, his flight was a bit jerky. The machine occasionally twitched from side to side, but it didn't fall over. 3 times the boy launched and landed the drone quite successfully. The small screen on the drone made it possible to immediately watch the recorded video. That's what the babysitter and the boy did during their snack time. Deciding to launch the drone again, the boy touched the cherished start button. Only this time, trying to perform a steep maneuver, Max turned the drone too sharply to the right and failed to control it. The drone spun and fell, somewhere behind the fence in the trio's field of vision. "Well, he fell," said the child, "and also probably lost. What shall we do?" "Don't worry. I'll be sure to find him. It would be a shame to lose such an interesting toy." Nanny consoled the boy. Taking a basket of food from the stump, she led Max to the car, then turned to the driver, waving her hand in the direction of the fence. "We've got a drone down somewhere that way. Keep the boy busy for a while, and I'll go look for the machine." The driver nodded and let the businessman's son sit in the seat next to the driver's seat. The only entertainment George could offer the child was games or cartoons on a tablet in the car. Max was fine with that. Meanwhile, Angela did not waste a minute and went in search of a toy. On the way to the fence behind which the flying machine crashed, the girl picked a few wildflowers. When she reached the place, she read the inscription on the gate. It turned out that behind the fence was the village cemetery. The blue paint on the metal fence was faded from exposure to sunlight and rainwater. This gave the place a certain mystique and touch of mysticism. Like any other, this resting place of departed souls had its own peculiar atmosphere and mournful silence, which could not be affected by anything from the outside world. When Angela entered the cemetery and closed the gate behind her, she looked up, remembering roughly where the drone had fallen. Determining the direction, she walked between the graves. Some of them were intact, and in some she could see holes that looked like mole holes. Minks. The silence had a peaceful effect on the girl. Thoughts swirled in her head about how fast this life is, and that she should appreciate every moment of it. Angela couldn't help but sigh sadly, and then walked over to several graves on the side where the toy had fallen. 2 of them were far from new, and judging by the dates engraved on the tombstones, they were the graves of deceased old men. But the outermost, 3rd grave, the one closest to the thicket of bushes, was quite fresh. It was the gravestone with a cross on it that told me a boy was buried there. Judging by the data on the plaque, it was only 5 days ago. The words embossed under the date of death made it clear that the boy's grieving mother had never come to terms with the loss of her son, and understandably, it is very hard for all parents to bury their own child, especially at such a young age. 30 years old, you would have lived, and you're gone. Saying these words, she placed on top of it the wildflowers picked behind the fence and added, "May the earth rest in your soul." Then she shook her head as if she were getting rid of some obsession. She looked around the place to begin her search for the drone. She noted to herself that the village cemetery was full of grass and weeds, and it was clear from the moist soil that the rains had recently washed vegetation down to her waist. The fact that it had not been mowed, the girl was not surprised. She knew that cemetery staff were not big fans of odd jobs, and tended to shift the burden of grave care onto the relatives of the deceased. The weather that day was warm enough, almost no wind, and the green leaves were rippling on the branches of the bushes. But, as luck would have it, the sun was in the zenith. The air was very warm, and it was unbearably hot. It seemed as if everything around her was in an invisible mousse. Angela felt drops of sweat forming on the back of her neck. Pulling her backpack off her shoulders, she took out a paper handkerchief and wiped the moisture from her neck. It got a little easier. How long would it take to find a drone in this kind of thicket? The girl said thoughtfully, "But I did promise to come back with a toy, didn't I?" But I did promise to come back with a toy, didn't I? In the minutes that Nanny had been in the cemetery, she had met no living people. Only a flock of crows flew over the trees at some distance from her. The girl stepped away from the grave with the young boy and was about to begin her search for the flying machine when suddenly a strange sound was heard somewhere nearby. She shuddered and looked around, but there was not a soul around except for a couple of birds perched on a willow branch. Well, now the heat is making me think of things, Nanny muttered grudgingly, taking a step toward the thicket where she assumed the drone might have fallen. She heard the strange sound repeated. "No, that doesn't sound like birds at all," she said aloud. After a second, a hunch about what the unusual sound resembled from the outside struck her like an electric shock. "My God, isn't that a human voice?" the girl whispered. At first it was as if she were paralyzed, for the sound was coming from that very fresh grave. Quickly overcoming her stupor, she walked back to the grave, leaning over it. The girl listened and quite distinctly discerned a couple of phrases. "I'm alive. Somebody help me." What she heard again sent her into shock. Of course, the girl didn't think at all that the guy recently buried there might be alive. That said, she was a realist, and she didn't believe in ghosts either. Standing at the grave, she surmised aloud. It happens, after all, that a dead person is put under another one, just a little higher up. Is deciding that her theory was correct. The girl took a step back from the grave and looked around, hoping to see cemetery workers. When the sound repeated itself once more, she realized that she had to act immediately and hurried to the observed gatehouse. There she was met by two brothers who had been working at the funeral parlor for years. They were used to getting good money for their services, and they were never in a hurry to do anything for free. When Angela entered the gatehouse, the brothers only looked at her indifferently, and then the older one asked, "What do you want?" "There's a dead man in the grave talking," she blurted out the girl. "What do you mean?" "What dead man? What grave?" the younger one asked, staring at the girl incomprehensibly. So she told the men the whole story from the beginning. However, her story did not arouse much interest among them. The reason was simple. In the years they had worked in the cemetery, they had already seen a lot and got used to the fact that relatives of the deceased often make up all sorts of tall tales. Usually, in order to calm the mourners, the brothers simply took them to the grave and pointed to the date of the deceased's death, engraved on the headstone. They calmed down little by little and left peacefully. They wanted to do the same with Angela, but she would not let up, and her insistence had exceeded all bounds. In the end, the grave diggers surrendered to her pressure. After exchanging a meaningful look with his younger brother, the older one shrugged and followed the girl, saying, "But let's go see your talking grave." She nodded and went first. The eldest followed her, and the youngest was at the back of the procession. And so all three of them reached the mysterious grave. As they approached the grave, the older cemetery worker hummed and said with a challenge, "There's that grave again. It's a strange grave. They filmed it with a video camera for some reason during the funeral. So what do we do next?" Angela was not confused and advised the man, "And you lean over the grave mound and listen." The cemetery worker grimaced, but followed her advice. The younger brother did the same. At first the older of the two heard nothing, but within a minute he could distinguish someone's muffled scream. Gravedigger turned pale, but still managed to pull himself together and immediately took advantage of the situation to his advantage. "Yes, I hear something, but maybe it's rats. That doesn't mean we have to tear up every grave on short notice, and for free, too." "Exactly," the older one seconded the younger one. "Can you imagine what would happen here if you just started digging like this? We'd be running around with shovels 24 hours a day, and time is money." Angela immediately understood the gravedigger's hint and calmly said, "Wait, I'll be right back." And stepping away from them at a distance, she muttered to herself under her nose, "What a mess they're making of corruption." When she reached the car, where George and Max were playing games on a tablet, she briefly told the driver about the grave. What if there really is a living person buried there? Then he needs help right away. And those two just want money, she summed up. He nodded and followed her silently. She led the child by the hand a little behind her, as it was impossible to leave a 7-year-old alone in the car. While waiting for the stranger, the gravedigger brothers smoked a cigarette and stood leaning against the shovel stuck in the ground. Here, the younger one spotted the girl walking backward and pushed the older one in the shoulder. "Look, here she comes. Who else is that with her?" As the trio approached the burial ground, she pointed to a grave mound and 2 men with shovels. "George, this is it here." But these gentlemen refused to help. Even from a distance, noticing the muscular driver, the gravediggers chickened out. After he gave them a stern look, they immediately began to dig themselves. Since the grave was fresh, it was not too difficult or time-consuming to dig when the cemetery staff dug out the coffin and pulled it out of the hole. They opened it, and what the adult standing next to the coffin saw shocked them. There was a boy alive in the box. He was holding his consciousness with the last of his strength, moaning as he did so, and he was on the verge of physical exhaustion and dehydration. "My God, we need to call the doctors and the police right away," Angela exclaimed, and immediately began dialing the right numbers. While removing the coffin from the grave, the nanny asked George to step aside with Max so as not to frighten the businessman's son with what might be in there. When the doctors and police were called, she approached the driver with the boy and told them, "Go to the car and show the doctors and the police where to go. In the meantime, I'll finish looking for the drone." Angela could not believe what was happening until the last moment. Only when the lawmen and medics arrived did she accept the fact that this was all real. The first thing the doctors did was to put the young man on a stretcher since he was unable to say a word and had no documents with him. They wrote the name on the grave cross. The doctors found no visible injuries on his body. There were no wounds, bruises, or fractures. The village police immediately took photographs of the scene and interviewed Angela and the Grave brothers. After all the necessary investigative steps had been taken with the grave, the brothers covered the hole with soil and removed the headstones and cross to dispose of them. Before the services left, Angela managed to find out from the doctors which hospital the boy in the coffin would be taken to. Then she was able to find the drone, which had fallen into the dense bushes that grew a few yards away from the excavated grave. Returning to the car, she gave the flying machine to the boy. Before returning to town, George asked her to stop by the local clinic, since that was where the boy she had saved had been taken. At the gate of the clinic, she told the driver and her ward, "Wait for me here. I'll just find out how the guy from the cemetery is doing." The receptionist told her that the young man she had saved had been admitted to the intensive care unit and gave her the name of a doctor to whom she could go for any questions. Angela sought out the doctor and, after briefly telling her who she was, asked about the young man's state of health. The doctor replied that he was immediately given an IV and blood samples were taken. All further information will be known only after the results of the tests. "Come in," the doctor concluded, realizing that this was a matter of hours. Angela gave the doctor her phone number and asked him to call her as soon as she had news of the boy's condition. When Angela returned to town, the first thing she did was tell Pablo what had happened. "We were in such a situation today. You won't believe it. The girl didn't leave out a single detail, even giving the last name and the name of the guy that were on the cross. She remembered them very well. John K." "How?" "Requested. The rich man turned pale when he heard the last name. I know this man in absentia. He's a businessman too, and quite alive and well. I saw him just the other day when I flew away on a business trip. I think he was buying plane tickets. And he was doing it in a hurry. It's unlikely that the same person could be in the grave and at the ticket office at the same time. Who, then, did I find in the cemetery? And in a rural cemetery? In another act of shock, Nanny exclaimed. Alas, I do not know, her employer replied. Only the boy himself can answer this question when he wakes up. Realizing that in any case, it is not possible to do anything or find out yet, the girl spent a couple more hours with the son of a businessman and then went home. Next, it was her day off, so she decided to visit the village hospital. When she arrived, she found the boy's attending physician. Hello. I wanted to know about John K's condition, she said. I can tell you the good news. He's awake now. Only it turns out that's not his name, the doctor replied. Then what is his name? Andrew O. You know what's strange. Our specialists found faint traces of a powerful poison in his blood, which has a paralytic effect. I can also tell you that no autopsy was performed on this guy. In fact, the burial itself was carried out in violation of all the procedural norms. Apparently, someone wanted to get rid of the guy very badly to hide the use of poison. What room is Andrew in now? He's already been moved from the IQ to room 209. It's on the second floor to the right of the stairs. It's visiting hours, so you can go up and see him. Oh, thank you. That's exactly what I'll do. The girl thanked the doctor and headed for the stairs. Finding the right room, she knocked and went in. The room was designed for 3 patients, but at the moment no one but a young man was there. He, noticing the stranger who entered, calmly asked, Hi, who are you? Hi, who are you? My name is Angela. Thanks to me, you are here now and not in the tomb of the village cemetery, said the girl. The boy was still weak, and his reaction was not quick. The first thing he did was to thank Nanny for his rescue as she sat down in the chair next to the bed. She nodded her head and asked, Do you even remember what happened to you? How you ended up in that coffin? The boy closed his eyes for a second and then leaned up in bed, leaning on his elbow, and assuming a half-sitting position, answered, I don't know what happened to me. The last name on the cross is not mine. I am all of 30 years old, and I'm not a politician, and I'm not a financial crook to get back at me for something like that, or anything like that. I'm the most average longshoreman. It looks like I was drugged with something, the boy answered. With what and how did it happen? She said thoughtfully. With what? I do not know. And it turned out that in the evening I met a girl. I was just coming to the end of the work shift. She suggested we sit in a cafe and have a cup of coffee. As a single guy, I had some free time, so I agreed. That's the last thing I remember. Nothing else. Then I woke up in a coffin with makeup on my face, felt it with my fingers. Of course, I started calling for help, though I had almost no strength. The young man finished his story. How could it be? The nurse shook her head. You can't just put someone else in a coffin and bury them alive for no reason. Did you tell the police about that? You know, about the girl, about being drunk? Andrew shook his head in reply. No, I didn't. I don't like them. I got a suspended sentence in the past and for nothing. I haven't had a warm feeling for them since. That's your business, of course. But you know, I won't rest until I know what's what in this case. Angela promised the boy and herself. It's not every day I save people from the grave. How much longer are you going to be here? About a week, answered the young man. Then they let you go home to the city. Well, that's good. I think I'll see you again, said the girl with a smile. Of course, answered Andrew, also smiling. Do you mind if I know how to reach you? Taking a notepad out of her backpack and tearing out a sheet of paper, the girl wrote her name and phone number on it, then put it on the nightstand next to the bed. As the door closed behind the girl, the young man noted to himself that he liked this girl. Why not start with friendship? The guy said aloud, picking up a piece of paper with Angela's name and phone number. On her next workday, the girl decided not to pull the cat by the tail and start her own investigation, asking her employer for help. However, Pablo asked the nanny to wait until the evening because he had urgent work matters at the moment. The girl nodded understandingly and went to attend to her ward. "Today I propose not to sit at home, but to go to the cinema," Angela said to the boy. "Yeah, great," pleased Max. "Then put your feet in your hands and go." Clapped her hands. Nanny clapped her hands. "I'll get George." In the morning there were not many people in the theater, so tickets for the cartoon were bought without any problems. After an hour-and-a-half session, it was decided to take a walk in the square next to the theater. After eating one last popsicle, they got into the car, and the businessman's driver took them home. However, he had not yet returned from work, so the nanny took the boy to draw. An hour later, the owner came in. His working day was over for the day, so he could let the nanny go home. Before she went, she asked the man, "Do you happen to know someone at the police department?" He was surprised. "What do you want with the police?" "You see, I want to know about the last name that was written on the cross, and also why that guy was going to be killed and buried under a false name. I don't believe it could have just been an evil joke or anything." "Well, I can't say no to you. After all, you saved my son not long ago. And I don't forget good deeds. And I don't forget good deeds. Yes, I have acquaintances in the police. I'll put you in touch with the right person who can help you. Now I'll call him and arrange a meeting. All you have to do is come to the police station on the appointed day at the right time. You tell the man it's from me and there won't be a problem." Without delaying the matter, the man immediately dialed the number of his acquaintance. The man arranged for the man to see her tomorrow. Thank you, the nanny said with a smile. The man only nodded quietly in response. The nanny, however, went home with a feeling of inner satisfaction. After spending the evening in front of the television watching her favorite sci-fi series, the girl mentally prepared for tomorrow's conversation with the police officer. As such events, with the buried and rescued from it, occurred to her for the first time, the excitement periodically rolled over the young provincial girl. But then the next morning came, and having thrown her backpack on her back, the girl drove to the city police station. At the entrance, she was met by the officer on duty. "Who are you and what is your business?" he asked. "My name is Angela. I have an appointment." The officer on duty immediately dialed an extension number to contact the person she came to see. After a minute, the guy hung up and, looking at the girl, said, "Come in, turn right behind the turnstiles, then straight down the corridor to office number 15. They are waiting for you." "Thank you," thanked Angela, and went in the direction of her named office. Once inside, she met with a middle-aged man sitting at the desk. "Hello, my name is Angela. I'm from Pablo," she said. Yes, I'm aware of that." The representative of the law answered with a smile. "He asked me to help you in any way he could in gratitude for the good deed he did for you. So sit down and let's begin." After Angela sat down across from him, he spoke to her again. "So what exactly do you need my help with?" Angela summed up what had happened to her, leaving out the details and focusing on the important details. The story of the living dead is well known. The boy was very lucky to have you there. I will, of course, make inquiries about the man in question through my channels, but you must be prepared for it to take more than a day. The policeman warned me at once. I understand that. In any case, I won't be able to rest until I know why they put him in the grave. Just imagine yourself in his place, looking into the unperturbed eyes of the policeman, said the girl. Despite the fact that the man's gaze remained serious, she caught the light of sincere concern for the situation. The officer of the law stood up and offered his hand to the visitor. She did the same in return. After the handshake, the policeman said, "We'll do everything in my power to resolve your question. Sweet girl, there is no way you can remain in the dark." Thanking the man, she left the office, and when she closed the door, she sighed with relief, knowing full well that she could only wait for news from the investigator. Angela had her full attention on her work. The pleasant thing was that the victim was soon to be discharged from the hospital. The father of the girl's 7-year-old ward didn't stay away either, promising to ask about the situation in his circles, as he himself knew too little about it. So the girl wondered what would come of it. The sooner she would be contacted by a policeman, the sooner the unhappy man would be discharged, or the sooner she would hear from the businessman. The guy she had saved was the first to make himself known. Angela was just finishing her nightly cup of tea to begin the process of getting ready for bed. She reached for her cell phone to put it on airplane mode when suddenly it rang, an unfamiliar number popping up on the screen. Who could it be at this hour? Nanny muttered, and touched the button to accept the call. Hello from beyond. The voice on the phone said jokingly, I think you recognize me and there is no need to introduce yourself. Sonia instantly left the girl and was replaced by a burst of vivacity. Of course I did, she said cheerfully. I was discharged yesterday, so I'm already in town. I suggest we meet tomorrow. Do you like ice cream? Andrew asked. I just love ice cream, Nanny answered. But I have to work tomorrow afternoon and I'll be free in the evening. Well, that's nothing. I know the perfect place to meet. You'll love it. See you tomorrow, the guy said, and hung up. At that, the nanny felt as if an invisible interlocutor winked at her. The girl finally went to bed. The next morning, she came to work with evident enthusiasm. This did not escape the attention of her employer. Have you won at least $1 billion in the lottery? The businessman asked with a smile. What? No. Why should I? The girl did not understand. I can see that today you are in a good mood. It means that something inspiring happened, explained the man. Angela was embarrassed for a second, and then she explained briefly. The guy I rescued called yesterday. He said he was already home. I'm going to see him tonight. That's great, the man smiled. First work, then a date. By the way, I have some information on the man whose name was on the cross in the village cemetery. I asked around and they told me this. It turns out that among the businessmen, that man was a mediocre businessman, a small time, so to speak, owned several outlets for the sale of spare parts and consumables for foreign cars. He was often seen in the company of women and always different. However, lately he had been seen with the same girl, much younger than himself. That's all I could find out. I think a lot of new information on this case will come from Oliver from the police. Glancing at his large dial wristwatch, the man added, And now it's time for you to go to soccer practice. When you get back from there, you'll have to tutor him in reading and drawing. With a short nod, the young nurse took the hand of the boy who had run up to her and left the house together. The day flew by quickly, and having wished a good evening to her ward and his parents, she left to meet the young man at the agreed place. He too was waiting for her outside an ice cream parlor. When she noticed the boy, she slowed down to consider him. The young man had a lean figure. He couldn't be described as short, and his dark hair was cut short. As she got quite close, the girl was able to look into his brown eyes. After saying hello, the young man entered the cafe and settled at a table away from the entrance. First, they discussed what had happened to the boy. Then the babysitter shared what she had learned from her employer. After that, the couple moved on to talking about everyday things. It was getting dark outside, and the evening lights were on. When they left the cafe, Anna could not resist taking a couple of pictures with their friends in front of the building. She felt in her heart that she would meet the man again. That night she fell asleep as soon as her head touched the pillow. The last person who planted solid information on her was a policeman she knew. He called the girl the next morning. The nanny was just beginning to get ready for work when she heard a cell phone on the nightstand. When she picked up the phone, she heard the same serious male voice. Hello. Would you like to know something interesting about your burial case? Then come right now, if you have a few minutes free time. Quickly glancing at her watch, she answered, Yes, I have some free time before I have to show up for work. Before she knew it, she had reached the police station. She was anxious to find out the clue to the events. The officer on duty was aware of her visit and let her in without any questions. She remembered the office number and where it was located. So, just a minute later, she was already sitting across from the police officer, then told the man what she had learned from her employer, and then what the victim had told her about meeting the girl who had offered him to have coffee together. The law representative immediately asked, "Did this young man remember her appearance? Could he give a description for a sketch?" "I think so. In his conversations with me, he mentioned in passing that he could recognize her," replied the girl. "Then it makes things easier. I'll share with you what I learned through my channels, and you'll understand why you need a sketch of the girl." So I made some inquiries and found out a lot of interesting things. It turns out that the man whose name was on the cross was missing. No one had seen him for days. It was as if the man had simply vanished. I was suspicious, so I checked his credit history. It turned out that before he disappeared, he had taken out a huge loan from the bank. And that's what this particular wretched businessman looks like. With these words, Oliver turned the monitor so that the girl could see the image on it. Looking at the picture, Angela groaned and pulled out her cell phone. She opened one of the pictures she had taken together with her new friend and put it in front of the policeman. He, seeing the picture, nodded meaningfully, while still remaining calm, and then returned the phone and said, "Yeah, the resemblance to the guy who almost got buried alive is striking. A little makeup and they become doppelgangers." "Makeup," Nanny exclaimed. "He told me that when he woke up, he felt the makeup on his face with his fingers. But I still can't figure out how all these factors are interrelated." "Nice girl. There's an obvious scam going on here. And your ward got into this mess purely by accident. Apparently, that negligent businessman wanted to kill the guy and bury him in his place, seemingly with his mistress as an accomplice. And the grave was videotaped for the collectors, because the businessman was never going to pay back the money he had taken on credit. However, they miscalculated the dose of poison. That's why he woke up in the coffin. If it had been a little bigger, the guy would have been dead." The policeman finished his story. But that seems to be your guess. There's no proof. Nor are the culprits of all this to be found, for it is not known where else to look for them," she said bitterly in her voice. "And that is why a description of the mistress would be useful. As his trail is lost, she may be the means of tracing him," said the officer of the law. These words gave Nanny hope that all was not lost, and that justice would be done. Nodding, she uttered, "You will have this sketch." That was the end of the conversation, and the girl hurried off to work. That same evening, she wanted to arrange a visit to the police with the guy, but remembering his words about his lack of warm feelings for people in uniform, she decided not to press on. This was a point she broached during their next walk. Of course, the suggestion to go to the police station to draw up a sketch was met with hostility. For a good hour, she persuaded the boy to overcome his fears so that the perpetrators could be found and punished. In the end, the young man surrendered. In order to compile a sketch, the policeman escorted the young men to an officer who, from the boy's words, compiled a clear portrait of the businessman's mistress. Very soon, their faces were flaunting on all the poles and TV channels. These two are far from professionals. In addition, they are very careless in their actions. Sooner or later, one of them will make a mistake. "That's when we arrest them," the policeman said. That was the nanny's last visit to the station. The young men had no influence on the investigation. We could only hope that the sketch of the unsuccessful crooks would do the trick. Soon the young people's lives returned to normal. Angela still worked as a nanny. Andrew was able to return to his old job as a loader. In a short time, the two became almost inseparable. The girl herself did not notice how she fell in love with the man she pulled out of the other side of the world. She was sure Andrew felt the same way about her. And so it was. It was just that the boy had promised himself not to rush things and get to know each other better first. The events at the village cemetery and afterwards paled in their memories. They were replaced by pleasant memories of their time together. Their friendship, which had begun so strangely and unexpectedly, gradually developed into a pure and sweet love, which strengthened day by day. On a Sunday evening, the girl was sitting at home in a comfortable armchair, slowly savoring candy given to her by Andrew. On the box, in carelessly stroked handwriting, in black marker, was written with love. One heart topped the inscription, though simple but from the heart. After eating one more candy, Angela closed the box. Suddenly a thought flashed through her head that it would be interesting to know how the investigation ended with the businessman Crook. And it was as if a higher power had heard her unspoken question, the answer to which was already ready. Arriving at her ward in the morning, Angela listened to the instructions for the day. Afterwards, Pablo handed the girl a flash drive and said sternly, "Here are 2 videos. Oliver gave them to me under great responsibility. This is a copy of the interrogations of that very businessman and his girlfriend. You can watch them on your own time, then give me back the flash drive so I can erase the tapes. Is that clear?" "Of course," Nanny replied just as seriously. By the law of meanness, this day dragged on like a turtle. And all because these videos were supposed to put an end to her mini-investigation, and she wanted to see them sooner rather than later. After running all the errands given by her employer, she literally flew home, kicked off her outdoor shoes, and put a flash drive in the computer system unit. It became clear that the businessman realized he could not get away only after he found out that his mistress could not stand to tell everything during the interrogation. He had no choice but to confess, and it was not long in coming. This video ended with the signing of a paper with a confession and the man in custody. The second video showed the mistress in the interrogation room. You could tell by her condition that the girl was nervous and would break down pretty quickly. And so it happened, finally smearing the remnants of her makeup all over her face. She spoke. "I met John by chance. I liked him. What's the big deal? Handsome man. Not even old yet. And he's single with money. It's a shame to miss him. How did I know he'd be so crazy with emotion? And I wasn't going to marry him." Everything was fine for a while, and then his business fell apart. He couldn't think of anything better to do than take out a loan. But he couldn't pay me back, so I came up with a fake death idea. I found a guy who looked like him, who fit the role of scapegoat, and it wasn't hard to make up for him. Yes, I videotaped the grave, and it was a way to get the collectors off my back. Here's the grave, here's the last name and date of death. The plan was perfect if that idiot hadn't been stupid with the poison, but the girl blurted it all out in the same breath. Then she was taken away and the tape plugged in. Pulling out the flash drive, the girl immediately put it in her backpack, not to forget to give it to her employer. Many different thoughts flashed through her head before sleep finally took hold of her. On the one hand, she felt pity for her young mistress, but on the other she judged her. After all, she was only taking advantage of the man as long as he had money. The nurse did not understand how it was possible to bury an innocent man in the ground without even blinking an eye. Eventually, the cemetery story was forgotten. Nanny and the baby made many more trips to those places to launch the drone. Only after their experiences, they chose an area closer to the village. The boy was getting better and better at flying the drone, so the drone never fell down again. In that village, the businessman's son made friends with several boys, which turned simple outings to nature into entire picnics. It took a few months before Andrew proposed to the girl the idea of living together. "How would you like to move on to the next phase of our relationship?" he asked her one day after visiting a movie theater. "What's that?" she wondered. Move into my apartment. It's not rented. It's my own. There's enough room for both of us. That's a tempting offer. Then I could rent out my own apartment so it wouldn't be empty. After 3 months of living side by side in the same apartment, the young people never regretted this step in their lives for a second, since they both worked and were not with each other for days. Friday night, over a cup of tea, Andrew looked at Angela in a strange way and said, "I have a surprise for you tomorrow, so get ready." Curious to the core, she smiled. It was Saturday, and the young man took her to a cafe. It wasn't a restaurant, but it wasn't a diner or a bistro. They each had a light vegetable salad and a coffee with cream. When the girl took her last sip of her drink and put the empty cup on the table, the guy said, "Now close your eyes and stretch out your arms." As she complied with the young man's instruction, the girl involuntarily tensed up. She felt him put a round object on her finger. "That's it, you can open it." She heard his warm voice. When she opened her eyes and looked at her palm, she saw that there was a silver engagement ring on her finger. The boy looked directly at her and asked, "Will you marry me?" "Yes," the girl answered. The young man gave Angela his signature disarming smile. Her cheeks immediately flushed. Preparations for the wedding began the next day. Still a modest provincial girl at heart, she planned a quiet wedding, although she dreamed of a ceremony in a big way. However, Pablo offered to help her, both financially and in choosing a good church for the wedding. He reasoned that her introduction to Andrew was unusual. Plus, his spouse and himself like to attend various banquets and celebrations. Plus, the monetary side is not a problem for him. So the young people's wedding was well attended. A wedding ceremony, a white wedding dress, a banquet, congratulations. That's how the girl imagined the beginning of marriage in her dream. She was happy that her goal, which she had set for herself, was being fulfilled. Not only was she able to get out of poverty, but she also met her other half. The businessman gave his employee a vacation for her honeymoon. The newlyweds spent it in Turkey. There they literally disconnected from the outside world and enjoyed only rest and each other. Angela ran her fingers through a necklace of sea pebbles and pearls, bought in jewelry store. Turning down the volume on the TV, she decided to voice an idea that had occurred to her since she returned from vacation. "You know, I've been thinking about this. Since I like my job, and I'm great with kids, why not go beyond one child? What if I opened my own developmental center for the kids? That would be so much fun. I could do creative activities with them, make crafts, go to different events. The idea is great. But the question is, where to get that start-up capital and cope with your plans?" My husband rubbed his chin. "I think financially you could go to my mentee's father. As a businessman, he is likely to assess the prospects for investment. And there are already helpers, and here he is, sitting next to me. I'm afraid I'm only good for you as a workforce. I'd rather be a laborer. In any case, I fully support your idea." As she had expected, the businessman agreed to act as an investor of her ideas. He thought it was a promising and useful project. With his help, things went quite quickly, and she realized what she had in mind. Not once did she catch herself thinking that if she had not saved Max, then none of this would have happened. Or maybe it would have happened, but in a different way. It didn't matter, though, because she wouldn't trade her happiness for anything.